Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. We're talking with Lindsay Bryan-Podvin, and we're going to be discussing 3 ways to overcome money shame. Lindsay's a money therapist, which I've never met one before. So this is very exciting. And everyone that I've told it to is like, that's such a good idea. Of course, it makes sense someone would do that, but we've never heard of it before. So it's such a cool concept, and I'm really glad that you're sharing with us. So we'll do the way we normally do it, which is Lindsay will talk for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and we'll pause in the middle for donations, and then I'll share a bit at the end. And Lindsay, I don't know how much time you have for Q&A.
Yeah, I can stick around for a bit.
Great. And you get to see my face this whole time, so I'll be I'll emote so much.
I love it.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, this is my least, I need to be able to share my screen. I was going to say, this is my least favorite part is when, you have to do the tech transitions, because even after 14 months of doing this, there's always that hiccup. So I appreciate everyone bearing with me through this. So yeah, as Ariana shared, I'm Lindsay Bryan-Podvin. I'm a financial therapist, and we are connected through the amazing Annie Schuessler. So I'm just thrilled that is the connection, and really happy to be here tonight. As a mental health clinician, social work background, money stuff is heavy and hard, and we get so many mixed messages in this field about what we are allowed to do and not do with our money. And I think it's really important to talk about it and be transparent about it in a way that is in alignment with our values. So yes, we will be talking about what money shame is, 3 different ways to overcome it. And then of course, we'll be talking a little bit about the organization, and hopefully you all can open your purses and pocketbooks as much as feels comfortable and aligned for you. Since again, the donation is matching 3x through this evening. So I want to start out with a big myth that I often hear in the world of mental health and health and wellness practitioners. And I want to remind you all that it in fact is possible to be a good clinician and make a sustainable living. Those 2 are not in conflict with one another. And in fact, my belief is that when we take care of ourselves by practicing financial self-care, we can show up more wholly for the clients that we are called to serve. And a quick primer / reminder on the differences between guilt and shame, and why shame can be so insidious. And it's this slight difference where with guilt, it's external. I did something bad. I made a mistake. Whereas with shame, it's I am bad. And when it comes to money, it often sounds like I'm bad with money. I'm just not good at it. It's not my thing. We really beat ourselves up for the relationship we do or don't have with money, and the ways in which we interact or don't interact with our money. And like anything, when we have shame, it impacts our ability to flourish. And as a mental health care provider or health and wellness entrepreneur, we all know this shame spiral that kind of, just becomes this domino effect where you make a mistake perceived external, but then you bring it in and make it something about you. And then when that shame is internalized, it then kicks off all the other times where you've done something wrong or bad or inappropriate, whatever you want to call it, with your money. And it festers. So for example, maybe you're like, okay, I'm going to launch a community. I'm going to launch a group. I'm really excited about this. My community said they want to do something intimate, and you create this amazing container. You write up a beautiful web page. You email all of your friends, and the day comes and nobody enrolls or signs up for or joins your program. And you launch into this financial shame spiral that sounds like, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. I shouldn't have never left my community mental health job. I don't know the first thing about marketing and launching a group. I spent so much time and energy and money marketing this and renting out a space, and now it's just going to waste. This proves that I'm just not cut out to be an entrepreneur. I'm just not cut out to do this, right? And it impacts our ability to serve our community and serve our clients when we believe that we are bad at business or money or marketing. And it also might show up when it comes to something a little bit more tangible, which is raising your rates. As a health and wellness entrepreneur, you're like, all right, I am so sick of feeling unsustained in my work and I need to raise my fee. And you raise your fee, and you know that if you raise it just a little bit, $10, $15, it will actually provide you with the cushion that you need to feel financially secure. And of the 20 clients that you serve, 19 of them don't bat an eye. They're thrilled for you that you are raising your prices. They don't think about it. But one person does say like, oh, I can't believe you're raising your fees, or gives you some kind of feedback. And again, that shame spiral kicks off. I'm such a greedy capitalist. I'm just giving into this system. I can't believe I thought I could raise my rates. I'm better than this. I know what I do. I'm just going to slide my scale. I'm going to exit the capitalist rat race, and I'm just going to be done. That'll be a way for me to overcome my money shame. I just won't deal with money. Also not a wise choice, but right, we do this. And what makes shame worse, as we know from our friend Brene Brown, are three things: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And when it comes to money, all three of these things are everywhere. We don't talk about money. We are quiet about it. We hide it. And we judge ourselves and we judge others for what they do or don't do with their money. So these three things are everywhere. And then when it comes to money, they're really intense. So secrecy and silence, again, sometimes we use them interchangeably, but secrecy is like actively hiding something, where silence is just shutting it down. So secrecy would be, shredding your credit card statements so your partner doesn't see them. Whereas silence would be kind of changing the subject if somebody asks about how your group community launch went, or, if you were able to raise your rates. Judgment is more of the blame, the shoulding of yourself, somehow believing that you deserved the outcome you got, like thinking you should have known better before signing a lease for an office in February of 2020, right before the pandemic. Oh my gosh, I should have known. I should have been listening to the news. I should have been following it more. I'm so stupid, right? There's that judgment there. And when it comes to money shame in marginalized communities, we've got all these extra layers that make it really difficult. So for folks in marginalized communities, depending on which identities they're in, they might be more likely to live in multi-generational households. And the personal finance community loves to shame people for not having boundaries with their family, right? Kick out your adult children, don't live with your elderly parents. That's not okay. So it doesn't take into account people who that is a part of their culture, is to live in multi-generational households. When it comes to BIPOC folks and women, historically, they have been boxed out of finances. Laws were put into place that, recently were overturned in the 60s and 70s that had prevented women from having access to banks and to credit cards. And we all know about how different BIPOC communities have been boxed out of having access to credit, to loans, being able to buy houses in certain places, the ways in which they attended, had to live in certain places and attended less than ideal schools. We're all familiar with that. The barriers in creating financial boundaries, again, kind of going back to that multi-generational piece. When you have a marginalized community, oftentimes your chosen family is more important. So you might have these kind of boundaries that, again, the personal finance people are going to say, don't loan, your friends money. You have to keep all those things separate. Traditionally, marginalized communities tend to live in high cost of living areas. When you look at the way that our kind of diversity map is spread out, you see this concentration of folks who are folks of color and who are more comfortable owning their marginalized identity in these higher cost of living areas. And there's this additional layer of risk of like going into entrepreneurship or into small business ownership. So we have all of these extra things going on.
Hey, Lindsay, can we pause for a second?
Yes.
I made you host, but I'm wondering if you can make me co-host just in case people try to get in.
Yes, of course. Oh my gosh. Let me see here. Here we go. Ariana. So it'll let me make you host.
Okay.
See what happens. But there was somebody who just wanted to get in. Actually, is it still letting me share?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, then I think we're
Yeah.
good. Awesome. That was a good workaround. So the good news is that there are things we can do to make this money shame better, which is, why you're here this afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And it's empathy and compassion, social support, and education. And again, as folks who are in the health and wellness field, we're pretty good at seeking out each of these things. And we also need to do it when it comes to our relationship with money. And when we think about empathy and compassion, I think it's really important to think about not just like, oh, they're there, but also how will you take whatever your perceived shame is around money and find a way to either make meaning of it or to figure out a way to avoid falling into that same sensation again. So it's being kind and realistic, but a part of compassion is also having a plan forward and a path forward when possible. And so it offers an adaptive viewpoint to this financial shame. So for example, if we just passed our annual tax date on Monday, if depending on how you file your taxes here in the States, and we're getting ready for our second quarterly taxes to be due in June. And the reality is a lot of us might be like, oh, shoot, I totally forgot to pay my quarterly taxes, and that could trigger some money shame. So rather than heading into that spiral, it could be, look, even though I didn't pay my quarterly taxes on time, I can pay them now. And I can set a calendar alert on my phone, on my Google Cal, to prevent it from happening again. Right? It doesn't have to be so over the top, but it can be subtle, empathic, and realistic when it comes to offering yourself empathy and compassion. And I think it's important to just offer some different examples of the way that financial self-compassion can look when it comes to overcoming money shame, because so many of us have a hard time identifying it, but sometimes having a readily available affirmation can be helpful to pull from when you're kind of feeling that shame. So for example, you could say something like, my money mistakes don't define me. In fact, my money mistakes actually give me some good information about what I'm doing and where I'm going. Another one kind of similar to what I started out with today, which is it's possible to be a healer and make a good income. I can resist and disagree with parts of capitalism while earning a living. Right? Because again, we get caught up on this binary of either or, when really a both and is probably more appropriate. And again, we have so much shame around debt. The personal finance space loves to tell people that debt is bad, it's wrong, you're stupid if you have it. And I would encourage you to think about, my debt doesn't define me. I'm working on a repayment plan. And if you're so inclined, also thinking about what has your debt afforded you? What has it given you access to that you might not have otherwise had access to? How can you practice gratitude for it if that feels right? Of course, there's a lot to be mad about in the way that loans are structured in our country. But again, if you took out 5, 10, 15,000 to start up your business, rather than beating yourself up for it, you can reframe that to that access to capital gave me the gift to be able to do my work in the way that I know that I'm allowed to do it and I'm best suited to do it. And for that, I'm grateful. And then the other thing that a lot of us in this space get caught up on is that we have to be cheap or budget or affordable in order to be accessible. And I'm here to remind you that financial accessibility is a part of accessibility, but showing up as your whole self, as a competent practitioner, actually is another measure of accessibility. Showing up as Filipino, showing up as queer, showing up as your disabled self, that is another way to say, I'm here for you and you are welcome in my practice. So we also have to remember that showing up in the way that we do is another level of being accessible to folks. The next thing is social support. Being here amongst other folks who are also learning about money shame is huge. Being connected to Ariana and their community is so important. Just like we know that social recognition of loss when it comes to grief is so important. That's why all cultures have some form of a funeral. We also have to remember that social recognition of any type of pain and hardship is important. So if we're struggling financially, whether it's perceived or whether it's real, getting social support is huge. And again, remember that secrecy, silence, and judgment are going to try and get in the way of you texting a friend and saying, like, hey, I just need to vent about how high my bills are this month. So encouraging yourself to say, I'm going to connect with others. This helps to normalize the experience, validate how you feel, and offers that social recognition for that pain and shame. And again, because money stuff is so secretive, what I often see in my work is people think that they're the only person who has ever experienced X. I'm the only person who's ever had a failed launch. I'm the only person who signed a lease that ended up being more expensive than I thought it was going to be. I'm the only person in the world who didn't file their taxes on time. No, I would not be in the field that I'm in doing a very specific type of work if these mistakes weren't everywhere, but we don't talk about it in our culture. It's super, super secretive. So, I can look at my neighbor driving a fancy new car and I can make all sorts of judgments and assumptions about them. But I, at the end of the day, have no idea if they purchased that vehicle in cash, if they took out on a 7-year loan. I don't know if they inherited money or if it's a company car, but I make all of these judgments and assumptions about what I think they are based on the vehicle they drive, right? We do this all the time. And then finally, education. And I think when it comes to money shame, one of the biggest shame pressure points or pain points that I hear and feel is, again, going back to this idea that, like, I just don't get money. I chose mental health care because I'm not a science person. I chose therapy because I don't like math, right? I hear those things all the time. I failed college algebra. Math is not my strong suit. And yet this is the work that lights me up because I so firmly believe that it's mostly emotional and psychological. So I invite you to get comfortable with some of the basics of the finances in your work to help you overcome that money shame. And today there are so many fantastic resources available, not just from, as my friend Berna Anat, who's also a Filipina financial expert, she says that the personal finance space is hella male and hella pale. And thankfully today, we have a variety of people, of blogs, of podcasts, of books who come from different backgrounds and can speak to you and with you in a way that feels good for you so you can get the information that you need to feel good. And when it comes down to it, there are a handful of things you need to know about money. Making sure that you can cover your monthly expenses. That's your revenue coming in, your expenses is the money going out. Whatever's left over is your earnings or your profit. In personal finance, we like to call this a budget. I prefer the term spending plan because budget feels really restrictive to me. But at any rate, that's like one thing to get familiar with and comfortable with. Another thing is to find somebody who you can talk taxes with. I don't think you need to know the intricacies of the tax code. Just having a general understanding of how much do I need to be putting aside? When do I need to be paying my taxes? What are some things I need to be thinking about to decrease the amount of money that I owe if that's something that's important to me? Always making sure that you're paying yourself. We are not in the space of doing really good volunteer work. I do volunteer work, but my volunteer work is not my business. And then also investing in your future. And that might look like investing in your retirement. That might look like making sure you have a will and a trust. It might look like putting money away for your children's education. There are so many different ways you can invest in your future, but those are things to consider and think about. And as I get close to the end of my chat with you all, I want to remind you that financial self-care is self-care. We can't take care of our physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual selves if we can't afford to pay our bills. And money to me is an exchange of energy. And if we can think about it as that, as a currency, it has to go in and out and it has to flow. And we want it to flow into our communities and back to us and out into our communities. So financial self-care affords us the ability to practice and care for our emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. And okay, so I did a lot of chatting, but just to recap, money shame is common. Doesn't mean you have to suffer from it. Secrecy, silence, and judgment make money shame worse. Empathy, compassion, social support, and education help with money shame and helps to dial it down a bit. And liberating yourself from money shame means creating a new relationship with money. Our relationship with money, just like all of our relationships, is fluid. It can change over time, and it's impacted and shaped by so many different things. So give yourself permission to engage with your money in a different way. Again, I'm Lindsay. My business is called Mind Money Balance. My podcast is of the same name. My website is of the same name. I'm currently on an Instagram hiatus, but usually you can find me there. And since I wanted to talk a little bit about why this charity is important to me before we shift gears into that. This is me on the left, the brown girl amongst the other white kids. Those are my sisters. I have a different dad than them, so I'm biracial. I'm Filipina and white, and I grew up in an all-white household in an all-white town in rural Michigan. I was very confused about my identity. I felt really off. I generally spent my childhood trying to assimilate, and it was only really, I would say, into my mid and late 20s, I'm 34 now, that I finally got comfortable reconnecting with my Filipino roots. I visited the Philippines for the first time in 2009, and that gave me permission to be Filipina in a way that felt good for me. It gave me permission to say I don't have to know everything about my heritage to claim that part of my identity. And now I feel Filipina enough, and I'm okay getting things wrong. And I'm just so honored to be at a point in time that we are in the world right now, where I can connect with folks from across the diaspora and do the work that I do. And as Ariana mentioned, I think in her emails, and obviously in promoting this, I wanted to, call to action, just some awareness for the National Asian Pacific Americans Women Forum. They have been doing amazing work, and they really stepped it up after the attacks in Georgia just a few months ago. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Ariana.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. That's it. That last slide, do you mind leaving that last slide?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, shoot. Now I'm back to not being a host.
Do you mind just reading those to us? The things that the...
Oh, sure. So the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum is an organization using a reproductive justice framework to elevate AAPI women and girls to help impact policy and drive systemic change in the United States. In addition to advocating for API folks, they collaborate in solidarity with other women of color who are experiencing injustice and harms of oppression and marginalization.
I love that they use a reproductive justice framework.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So I'm going to put a link. This is the time in the workshop where we pause to do donations, and I'm going to put a link in the chat box. And the organization, oh, thanks, Sarah. Sarah's got to run. The organization is doing a 3-to-1 matching donation today. So any donations that they do, did I just send that to Sarah? No, I sent it to everyone. Any donations that you give will be matched. And then if you want me to add up your amount, feel free to private message me so that then we know what our total amount is. And then I wanted to pause and see if people have any questions here.
Yes, definitely.
And if not, I can come up with some questions because this comes up in my work a lot.
Yeah.
Hey, Judy.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
What is a reproductive rights framework?
Sure. Ariana, do you want to take that?
The example that I saw that they're pushing, like on their website, they show different legislation that they're trying to push forward. And one of them was for access to abortion for teenage girls, so that they wouldn't need their parents' permission to have an abortion if they chose to. I think that's one example of probably a lot of different things that they're doing just to give someone more options with their reproductivity.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't heard of it before then either. So
Yeah, and they do a lot of work. A lot of Asian American immigrants, or Asian immigrants rather, women end up trafficked, unfortunately, into sex work. So it's also to help them kind of escape that work if that's important to them, and ensure that they have access to the services that they need to keep their bodies safe.
Thank
oh,
you.
that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Shannon donated beforehand. Shannon, it'll still be matched. It's
Yep.
today.
Yep.
It's today specifically. Yeah, and Shannon, if you want to private message me the amount, if you're comfortable doing that, then we'll add it to like the group's total. Any other questions for Lindsay while we have her here? Yeah, I'm gonna think of some of the questions that have come up recently for my people. I know some of my people feel that if they were raised without money, then how do they know how to price their services when that amount is going to be so much higher than like anything they've been familiar with or anything that their family has ever earned? I think that's something I hear a lot with people I work with.
Yeah, and that's to me. So that it's super common, and it's essentially, creating a false ceiling of potential earnings, right? We keep that ceiling where we feel comfortable and what we're familiar with, and breaking beyond that, just like anything, can feel really uncertain. Right? What does it mean about me that I earn more than my family? What does it mean about me to no longer fit into the same socioeconomic status that I came from? Right? There's a lot of those questions and judgments. And to me, I think about it as two things. One, when you're pricing your services, we price it to make sure that we can sustain our lifestyles, not just for how they are, but also for what we envision them to be. Meaning, yes, we want to make sure that we can take care of our food, our shelter, etc. But if we have additional funds, again, if we have additional currency, that can flow back out into the community, and you can choose to donate a certain percentage to certain organizations like we're doing here tonight. But you can also use that money to help provide other financially accessible services in your practice, right? You can say, look, if I have 10 people that can pay me my full fee, that means I'm able to take on a client pro bono or at a discount or at a sliding scale, right? It also helps to kind of balance the scales out. So one is it helps to break you out of that socioeconomic status and helps to narrow that wealth gap that is so prominent in our culture. So first, if you're experiencing that, I can only imagine how tough that might be. And also, you're doing something huge, which is almost unheard of in our country, which is to move up out of a socioeconomic bracket, right? It's a myth that most people can leave where they came from. So if you're doing that, you're actually totally breaking the generational chains of being in a lower socioeconomic status. And that's a gift to be able to move forward. So that's one, is like making sure that you can support what you need. And then two is also remembering that you aren't pricing based off of, again, what you think the market should charge, right? We have this idea that if the person to the left of me is charging 200 and the person to the right's charging 100, that I need to be charging 150, right? We get it in our heads that we have to stay the same, right? That's it comes from many places, but we all think that we should be doing that. That's how I priced my first services, right? I Googled around, what were people charging? And I picked a number like just below average. And to me, I was like telling people, I'm not expensive, but I'm not too cheap. Like I'm just like, it was like the Goldilocks pricing, but it had nothing to do with sustaining myself. So also thinking you're not charging for that hour of service or for that hour of acupuncture. You are charging for the value of the work that you provide. You're charging for all the years of education that you've gone through. You're charging for all the experience and expertise that you have, and you're charging for the value of the service, not by the hour. You're charging for everything. It just, that's how we bill. So that's my long-winded way of answering that question.
Yeah. That's interesting. The myth of that most people do move up a socioeconomic class. I didn't know that was a myth.
Yeah. Yeah. We mostly stay in our own bands.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Michelle and Shannon, I'm going to call you both out because I know you're building private practices right now. Any questions that come up as you're in the starting stages of thinking about earning money in a different way?
I don't have so much a question, but just a comment about viewing finances as self-care, right? That addressing, of course, if we're not looking at it, examining it, giving it attention, how do we, I haven't, that's something that I'm stepping into. So I appreciate that language around finances.
Sure. Of course, Shannon. My pleasure.
Yeah. I loved the concept of money as an exchange of energy.
Mm-hmm.
What a big difference that makes when we look at it that way.
Yeah.
Michelle, you can type your question too if that's easier than quieting your dogs. And Lindsay, feel free to stay around as long or as short as you want.
Sure.
I think our total so far is $510. So it's a really good amount. And thanks everyone so far for donating and for letting me know. All right. What are ways to access funding without accessing banks?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's complicated. So, of course, banks are some of the most common. And I would say that banks and credit cards are continuing to be the most common way for you to get funding. So I encourage folks to look up different types of banks and different types of funding to see which ones are more in alignment. Even the big banks, as awful as they can be, some of them have come out in support of diversity, equity, inclusion in meaningful ways by actually putting dollars behind their words, whereas some banks have just doubled down on being horrific, right? Like Wells Fargo. So you can also kind of check out what they have been doing and haven't been doing. And I can send Ariana later. There are a couple of different places where you can kind of crowdsource investments from folks. So it's like a Kickstarter, but instead of a Kickstarter for a product, it's like, I need $500 to be able to set up my private practice or something to that effect. So I can send some of those options. And then another thing I'll say that sounds pretty anarchist, but I promise you that it isn't, is I am kind of the mindset of like, what I want to say is scam the scammers, but that sounds really inappropriate. But what I will say is like, don't feel bad about taking money from the banks. To me, it is also, again, they have made their funds so inaccessible to so many of us for so long that if they are extending you a line of credit, take it. If you need it, of course, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. There's also like Mercy Corps, where you can do their IDA program and do like a 3-to-1 savings account if you take their business courses. There's a few different places around like that that'll give grants or funds like that as well. Great. Well, what I wanted to move into for this last part of the section is 3 concepts that I'm hoping you'll use to build your business or add to your business. So once you've tackled all of your money shame, what you want to address. Bye, Judy. Or what you want to add to it. So I thought a lot about what we could all be known for financially in business. And so there are 3 main things that I learned through owning a few businesses and developing them and changing them and experimenting with them. And the first one is that what I want people to know is that you can make as much money as you want to. I always tell people that when you're in private practice, there's no reason you can't earn 6 figures. It's all based on how you set up your business model. That's not necessarily what everybody wants to earn or even a goal. But I do think it's important to know that if you're owning a business, you can earn as much as you like. And I think that's valuable for many reasons, but part of it is feeling that sense of power and empowerment and liberation in your financial health leads to how you show up in other places as well. And a lot of it is based on how you structure your business. So whatever you set your business up to earn is exactly what it will earn. So if it's not earning the amount you want, it's all in the business structure versus not working hard enough or doing other things. So that's the first concept I wanted to share. The second one is that you can make money in a way that feels really good for you, and in ways that make you feel healthy or make you a better person or help you show up in a more authentic way, or even that help you show up for your family in healthy ways. So it can be that the way you make money, instead of kind of feeling like I need to clock in and make money this way because this is the only way I make money, but also I'm spending all of my time outside of work recovering from the way I just made all of my money. There's actually a way to tie the work and the labor with feeling really healthy and good and having it benefit the rest of your life. There's my business mentor, which is how Lindsay and I know each other, is named Annie Schuessler, and she has a really great podcast called the Rebel Therapist Podcast, which Lindsay's been on. And she recently interviewed a woman named Ebony Janice Moore, and they talked a lot about this resting, and then 80% of work being resting, and then 20% being actual working, and finding and still owning a business that's making a really good amount of money. So finding a way to do it that feels right for yourself and your family. And the last thing I want to share is that you can build a business that is really generous. So oftentimes we're taught that we build a business that centers on wealth, on hoarding resources. And then the more resources that you've accumulated, the more successful your business is considered. And it's not bad to be successful at making money, but you can build a business that's not the whole focus of it. That's not the point of it. The point of it might be generosity or taking action to support other people. And when I think about that generosity, it doesn't necessarily mean finances. It doesn't mean that you're donating a lot of money. It could just be that you build a business that allows you to be generous to yourself or generous to the people that live with you so that you're a kind person to them. And it could be that it's a financial thing or that it allows you to have time off. One of the people I work with, they have their business set up so that they have 2 days off a week that they donate to nonprofits that otherwise can't afford their services. So they volunteer in those ways. So having a business that is very generous, but also financially successful is a possibility, something I want everybody to know. Last May or June, right after George Floyd's death, there was a group of people who got together and created the Anti-Racism Business Pledge. You probably heard of that, Lindsay. I have it linked on my website, but part of it is building in these business practices that contribute and benefit communities of color. And that could mean that when you're hiring people with different identities than your own, or that you're donating a certain percentage of your proceeds, or that you're building in business practices that are intentionally anti-racism. But I wanted to put out there that that's possible. It's possible to build a business that has a different model that's centered around generosity and liberatory practices that do good in the world. So those are the main 3 concepts that I wanted to put out there. Just looking at my notes to see if I missed anything. That's all I had to share. Any questions before we end here? All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. We donated over 500 to the organization. And thanks so much, Lindsay, for being here and sharing your expertise. So I'm recording this and I'll share a recording with you, Lindsay, and I'll put it on my website too.
Lovely. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate your time, and I'm glad you guys learned some things about money shame.
All right. Bye, everyone. Bye, Shannon.
Thanks, Ari. Thanks, Lindsay.
Bye, Jenna. Thanks.
No, move him there.
Thank you, Lindsay and Ari.
Bye, Brant.